I'm Dylan, and this is the BlindSighted Perspective Podcast, where blind and sighted perspectives are given on a number of topics, with my friend Jared as a co-host in a casual style. My life since I went blind at 22, I will tell you about it. Welcome to the BlindSighted Perspective Podcast. I am Dylan, and this is episode 0. In this episode, I will basically be explaining how I became blind in a very short, way, in a very short, summarized way. And then, I'm going to explain how the podcast is going to be. Jared will not be in this episode, but yeah, so let's just get started. So, basically, I'm 23 now, but when I was born, I was born 2 to 3 weeks early, and due to some stupid things, I ended up having, a birth defect, and my sight, there was this thing I was diagnosed with called FEVR, but, there's something else similar to it that I think I actually have. I think I was misdiagnosed because the other one, they're both similar, pretty much about the same, but one is hereditary, which I couldn't find anyone in my family that had it. And then the other was, basically, from a birth defect. So my left and right retinas were partially detached, and then, my left one was worse, but throughout the years, my sight got a little worse, over time. But then about when I was 16 to 17, maybe in that area, my left eye went blind, but I never realized it because my left eye was so bad, I never could really use it anyways. So I just messed around with it one day and noticed that I couldn't see out of it. But I just used my right because I could actually see out of it and use it. My right was still bad, don't get me wrong. But fast forward to when I was, 22 in November, mid-November of last year, right? I went to bed and I woke up and my sight was a lot worse than it had been. So I waited one day to see if it would go away, and then it didn't. So I went and saw a specialist. And they told me that my retina had a tear and that if I didn't get it repaired, that I would go blind. So, with that in mind, I went to another specialist about an hour away. They said I had 2 tears and, that I needed surgery. It took me, about 3 weeks to be able to go and get this surgery because they were messing around. So, had they not been stupid and more diligent, I probably would still have my sight. But, what can you do? But so I did get the surgery on December 6th, 2017, and it didn't restore my sight to where it was usable. I should also say that in 2016, I had a cataract surgery, and it only helped my sight a little bit. It made things a little clearer, but, that was really not the issue completely. It was a small amount, maybe 10% of my sight. So the big problem was the retinas. But so it didn't really fix my sight. So that's basically the short version of it. If anyone in the future wants a longer version, a more in-depth thing about my life or what it was like when I was a kid and all this other stuff, then if enough people request it, I'll probably make a special episode or something for it. But for now, we'll just leave it at that. So now, next is the podcast and how the podcast will break down. So first, we're going to have the blind question. And basically, we're going to come up with this at first, but I'm hoping in the future, if we get listeners, that people can, send us an email with their blind question. We can get blind questions that way. That way we can answer people's questions, and it'll be more fun that way. And then next we have the blind-sighted stories. And I have to basically here explain what the podcast is kind of about, the blind-sighted perspective. It's basically it's partially about me being blind, yes, but it's also about me, reflecting on when I had sight and just, an all around kind of podcast. And also, Jared's going to be a part of it, so he's going to have sight. So it's going to be about both. It's going to be about like a multitude of things, not just blindness. So I just have to, be clear on that. And then the next thing, kind of with the blind stories, is, it could be a blind story. It could have been when I had sight. It could have been one where me and Jared were there together. Or it could have been just him, any story that he could come up with. Just something like that. So I just have to, make that clear. And then the next thing that we have is the blind hat poll, where we will pull 2 topics per podcast out of a hat and then talk about them. And yeah. And then we'll probably just wrap up the show. And so that, like, in the future we may add more things to it, but for now that's a good starting point in my opinion. So after that, then we'll probably just end the show. But that's pretty much the layout of it. I guess I'll explain a couple more things. The podcast will probably be once a month or twice a month, so bi-weekly. It really just depends. And also, we want to let you know that we will not be talking about politics or about religion. There's enough hate in the world, and there's no need for us to even talk about those things. We just want to have fun, with this podcast. It doesn't have to be complicated or stupid. I'm a chilled out person. That's just how I want it to be. So nothing stupid like that. So then, another thing, I will be editing the podcast. And, maybe if someone asks in a blind question, I'll answer how I do that. But for now, I'm not going to be, cutting anything out, really. Partially because I can't. One reason, though, is that I, want to keep it, I want to, look back on this and see how far I've come on my recordings. So that's one reason. And also, I just want it to be more realistic. No one can cut out their stuff for the most part. But that's just part of it. And then also, it would be really difficult for me to do it on the program I'm using. So, but yeah. So that's pretty much it. So this should answer anyone's questions and will direct people to this episode 0. And that has really been it for me. This has been the BlindSighted Perspective Podcast. I've been Dylan, and we will see you in episode 1 with Jared.